Slavery.
Genocide.
Slavery, genocide, historical fiction. All right. Anything else? Anything upbeat? Anything that is actually happy? Nothing is great.
Nothing.
Colonial.
Colonization.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
oh no.
There's nothing else that we historically experienced or contributed that groups us together as a culture.
Elitism.
Oppression and resistance.
Oppression. Okay. Uprisings, resistance and revolt, rebellions, revolutions. By the way, resistance, revolt, rebellion, revolution are all separate things. But they are grouped under the same category, right? And we know that we have insurrectionary versus non-insurrectionary revolts and resistance, right? But when we reach historical process, then we'll look at that, right? That's a late stage historical process, by the way. And when we start historical process, make no mistake, I'll be starting from 20,000 years ago up until 1965. I don't think I'm moving further than that. But yeah. So, historical definition now. How do we define the Caribbean historically? Right? So, this is actually the most complete definition of the Caribbean. Right? That is what it's defined as. But I want, as Caribbean studies students, we don't just take something as it is. I want you guys to pick it apart. I want you guys to discuss, look at it from different angles, and as a general hint to anybody analyzing anything or doing anything that requires some amount of um, analysis in a humanities concept, right? Humanities subject, right? Never take the information as fact or gospel. Always scrutinize everything everybody says, right? So let's look at what the historical definition has for us, right? So we said that it's the most comprehensive definition that encompasses all countries we recognize as Caribbean, right? As these islands share a collective historical narrative, this history has not only shaped the past, but continues to exert its influence on us today, right? That should be true. Hope everybody agrees with that. Consequently, the events span from the pre Amerindian era to the contemporary era, right? The contemporary period. Right, the contemporary period is usually described as the 21st century, 19th century, 20th century, 21st century, thereabout, right? Or no, actually. You can just use it to mean no. Contemporary Caribbean era, right? So we have that there. Understanding this historical continuum is essential for thorough appreciation of the Caribbean's complexities and the enduring impact of its past on the present. So we said some words, we used some terms that were used to, group all islands or all territories we see as Caribbean in one, right? One of the main thing is the migration of the Amerindians, right? So we've all heard the story, right? Some new Indians, in a sense, from around Eastern Asia. Well, would I say Eastern? Yeah, from around Eastern. Yeah, Eastern Asia thereabout, right? Around 20 to 25,000 years ago, within the coming to the end of the last ice age, passed over the Bering Strait or the Bering Land Bridge. Persons who do history in it one knows that it's either actual ice or a land bridge. There's a hypothesis between those two, right? But passed over that area, moved through North America via migration with animals, following herds through North America, and arrived in South America, right, in the Orinoco Valley, and then passed into the Lesser Antilles and moved up through the Lesser Antilles into the Greater Antilles, right? Now, these Amerindian groups, right, the Taínos, right, with larger groups such as the Siboneyes as well, right, the Kalinagos as well existed there, right. So the groups that we speak about, the Amerindian groups that we speak about, right, do we only include Taínos and Kalinagos, right, in our analysis of the historical definition, or do we also bring into realization the Maya, the Aztec, the right? Do we bring into realization those? Because if Belize is a part of the Caribbean, then the Maya and the Aztec, right, would most likely be a part of our Amerindian groups as well, right? So throughout the Caribbean, the main inhabitants or the first inhabitants, as the history books say, right, are these inhabitants, right? So all the Caribbean islands, generally all the territories of the Caribbean that we've seen have had these Amerindians somewhat present at one time or another, right? So we have these. So the migration of the Amerindians is one of the key historical processes that group us together as a region, right? Of course, it excludes Bermuda, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. It excludes Bermuda. But yeah, so we're looking at that in general region there. So the other movements that we've seen, the other things that we've seen that ties together the Caribbean countries through its historical past, right, or the general movements, right, such as the coming of the Europeans generally, the forced migrations or of the Africans, right, the indentured labor or the indentured servitude, right, of the Indians and the Chinese and also some Middle Eastern cultures, which way more Syrians and persons of Lebanese descent, right, exist in the Caribbean. Not as much as the other groups, but a lot of them do exist here, right? A lot of them are more, I can't remember. Is it more Lebanese? A lot of them are more Lebanese than Syrian, right? So we have those different groups coming into the Caribbean, right? So these are some historical movements that ties us together, right? So almost all Caribbean nations or all Caribbean territories that we deem as Caribbean have experienced the encomienda system, right, of the Amerindians. Can somebody just let me know what encomienda is? What is the encomienda system? Nobody can let me know. History students? Are there no history students here? Or are the history students? This is your time to shine, no? The geography students will have a time to shine. The sociology students will have a time to shine. The law students will have a time to shine. Come history students, what is the encomienda system? Anybody wants to ask? If they did not do it, unmute and just go ahead.
Has somebody already answered the question?
I haven't heard somebody probably in the chat. Let me check the chat. But could you go ahead though? Everybody has different definitions. So go ahead, let me know what the encomienda system is.
So based on what I the research I learned, it was a system implemented by the Spanish Empire, providing Spanish conquistadors with, what can I say, with a good amount of slaves, which are the indigenous people, with a certain, no, with a land. So basically, they were given a plot of land with a certain amount of slaves, and basically they had an agreement between the indigenous people stating that we will give you protection, give you food, shelter,
Mhm.
everything, and in return we will protect you from your enemies, and also they had to be converted from whatever religion rights they had to Christianity.
All
But
right.
it wasn't really a fair system, even though it was seemed as a fair system.
Okay. I want to one. Okay. Who saw it as a fair system? I know you mentioned it, right? Like it was unfair, of course, right? Which system of oppression would be fair, right? But probably oppressors probably would see it fair, right? So the encomienda system is the exchange for the complete oppression or control and subjugation of the Amerindians in exchange for becoming Christians, which they did not want. So you get something that you didn't want, right, by doing something you don't want, right? So that's basically what the encomienda system is really about, right? We're going to be looking at it a little bit more in the historical process, right? So we have an encomienda, right? They existed within these colonies, right? I don't think it was confusing, right? We also had repartimiento. We're going to be looking at difference between repartimiento and an encomienda. Repartimiento is basically what came after the laws of Burgos, right? And the laws of the Treaty of London and stuff like that. Can look at that, right? We also have chattel slavery that existed within the Caribbean as well, right? And we also had indenturedship, right? And everybody knows what indenturedship is, right? Everybody have a basic understanding of what indenturedship is. You see, because I skip over slavery
Yes,
because everybody
sir.
knows what that is. Okay, what is indentureship? Just let me know. One sentence or two sentences. What is indentureship? Go ahead. You can go. Go ahead.
I don't remember. Was it the Europeans that were looking for cheaper labor forces
Mm-hmm.
and they reached out to the different persons, so like the Chinese, the Indians, and stuff, and they offered them. Um, I'm losing my train of thought.
All right. That's fine. Okay, 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 okay. Let me help you out. All right. No, indentureship was as okay. This. Let me fix this. Let me fix something here. Let me just fix it. Because as we go through it, then I can find little things to just tweak. All right. Let me just fix this. So this would be two, three, four, and five. All right. So what we have here is in order now. It is now in order, right? So we had encomienda before, and then
Sir,
after.
if you're sharing your screen, I can't see.
Oh, you can't see the screen. Let me. Okay, let me reshare the screen. That's weird. Really, really, really weird. Let me share back to the presentation. You can see it now. Okay, let me know if you can see it.
Yes, sir.
All right. So it is in order, right? So encomienda came first, then repartimiento after the loss of Burgos, right? Then we're gonna have enslavement, chattel enslavement, transatlantic slavery, right? And then after that, indentureship. So after transatlantic slavery, after the abolition, right, of slavery, well, the legal abolition of slavery in a sense. After that, right, slaves left the plantations, so we needed people to actually work on the plantations because we have no more, enslaved persons to work on the plantations. So as you said, right, they reached out to different countries, war-torn countries, right? And colonies as well. For example, we well former colonies as well, right? So we have India, right? We have China, right? And we have different areas of the globe that were, as I said, war-torn. Life wasn't as particularly good. We also had the fact that some of them were fleeing religious persecution, right? So they came to the Caribbean, right? And they were paid a stipend to work on these plantations by the owners, right? So it is described as a form of slavery, right? Or it is now described as a form of slavery, right? It's a type of, it's similar to what we exist in now in the Caribbean per se. I hope I don't confuse anybody, but it's like similar to like wage slavery in which persons spend 9 to 5s and all of their hours working, right, for money that can barely buy their what is necessary for them to live, right? So it's similar to that, but what you do, you get persons from outside to come in, pay them extremely low wages, right, but wages nonetheless, and they worked on these plantations, right? So after they left the plantations, they actually could renew their contract and come back to work on the plantations, or they could be returned to their countries, which proved to be difficult. We'll discuss that further, right? As well as the fact that they could just leave the plantation and do what they could do their own thing, right? So a lot of them set up haberdasheries and businesses and stuff like that, right? That is evident within most Caribbean territories today, right? As we see that these persons tend to be within the business sector, the private sector, right? So we can look at those type of things as it relates to the historical process, but these are generally the movements that really define the historical um things, right? The historical definition in a sense, right? Let me I think that is right. Let me just put this down here. That's in the wrong place, right? So let's look at this, right? So repartimiento was here and encomienda was here, right? But let's just briefly review this. So as you guys were saying, encomienda is a Spanish labor policy, right? So it's something like this, right? So let's start with our repartimiento actually, right? So repartimiento is really really similar to encomienda, right? So after the discovery of the New World, in a sense, right? We have the fact that the Spanish came in and used our enslaved labor in a sense, right? Forced labor from the Amerindians, right, to work in gold mines, etc. Right? So generally gold mines, right? That's what they were mainly off after, right? And then we have encomienda in a sense, right? So it's the same thing, right? Different shape, in which we had the Christianizing the Indians, right, as a part of the general reality of encomienda, right? So we have something like that. You guys are not seeing the screen?
No.
No. What is happening? Um, what is happening? My bad. I don't think my laptop wants anything to be done properly. Let me stop the presentation actually, and then share the PowerPoint and then restart the presentation, because that might be the issue. Okay, so let me reshare now. Apologies. Hopefully it goes smoother in subsequent sessions, right? So not looking at the limitations, but looking at repartimiento, we know what repartimiento is, right? It's similar, right? So it's exploitation, right, of the indigenous persons, right, using them for wealth, right, extraction of wealth from the colonies, right. Encomienda is a similar process, right, but it's a little bit more ameliorated in a sense, right. So you would actually the Spanish settlers would actually protect the Amerindians, right, and care for them and Christianize them, right, and stuff like that, right, in order, and that was basically like their payment for the harsh labor. All right. So we have those type of things. But the main thing I want to ask you guys now, I want to hear from you guys in a sense, right? About the limitations of the historical process in a sense, right? So all these labor systems were triggered by European imperialism. Sure. Right? But looking at this now, what about the rest of the world though? What about the rest of the world? We have these things that group the Caribbean islands together, yes, but what about the rest of the world? So, a topic for argument that I have here, right? Slavery occurred elsewhere, and so did indentureship. Encomienda and repartimiento had cropped up on the Central American continent as well. How is this different from other regions that have suffered oppression under European imperialism? Right? Why is this uniquely Caribbean? Why do we use this to describe the Caribbean? Isn't slavery slavery? Isn't indentureship indentureship? Why is this unique to the Caribbean? Anybody? How are we different? How is the Caribbean different as it relates to these historical processes? Does anybody know? Or would anybody pray to tell?
You can repeat the question?
How are these processes different for the Caribbean? What we're saying in the historical process, we're using these things, we're using indentureship, we're using slavery, we're using encomienda, we're using repartimiento to define the Caribbean as a region. It's looking at these shared experiences in the Caribbean. But didn't other persons elsewhere share these experiences? If so, how is the Caribbean different? How can we use these differences to define the Caribbean if they are shared elsewhere? Is the Caribbean different as it relates to these systems? How was slavery in other parts of the world different from slavery in the Caribbean? How is Caribbean slavery a define of the Caribbean?
Sir, I'm guessing because the Caribbean was like a free for all area. Sir, meaning
So,
that
mhm.
the so when Christopher Columbus come to Jamaica, he ended up him actually stumbled upon the indigenous people. And you know that they weren't really that educated. They weren't really being ruled by anybody. In
Mhm.
such, therefore, I feel like so basically when you don't have like the education or what anything can just happen to you. So then just swoop them up and gone with them and work them out, and then now they get a pain and some of them. Man, no.
No, all
That,
right.
that that's what I think. Cause how I viewed it, it was that the Caribbean was like a free for all area because there wasn't really anybody in charge. That's my opinion.
Okay. So chattel slavery existed on the North American continent and on the South American continent as well, right? So chattel slavery existed in the American colonies, the 13 colonies that became the United States, right? Which slavery continued in the United States for a very long time, right? So, and then we also had slavery in Brazil. We also had chattel enslavement in other parts of the world, somewhat cropping up in India, somewhat cropping up in other areas, right? But a lot of persons difference what the difference with this transatlantic slave trade that persons have is that it was much more it was on a larger scale, right? So the transatlantic slavery doesn't only affect the Caribbean, right? It also happened in South America, it also happened in North America, right? So some persons could argue that it's different for the Caribbean because of the conditions under which Caribbean slavery was, enacted under, right? For example, within Haiti, as the most productive colony in the Western Hemisphere, right? And the most, precious colony in the Western Hemisphere, also had the largest scale or the largest ratio of the largest black to white ratio in the world in the Caribbean at the time, right? Plus thousands of enslaved persons died a month, right, in Haiti, right? So persons were seeing that this large scale of transatlantic slavery was a huge definer for it, right? So slavery existed in other areas as well, though. So that's a refuting point there. Some persons argue that it's different for the Caribbean, that it brings us together, and some persons argue that these things occurred elsewhere as well. So it can't be defining of the Caribbean, right? Somebody said in the chat, right, that the fight for independence is important and it can be used as a part of the historical definition. And that is true, right? While transatlantic slavery existed across the Atlantic, right? Indentured ship existed somewhat across the Atlantic as well, right? Encomienda and repartimiento existed within the Caribbean, right? And depending on which other definition of the Caribbean you use, in Central America as well, right? But our fight for independence is important, right? The Caribbean revolts, right, or the revolts against enslavement in the Caribbean are major definers of our history, right? A lot of persons who don't do history or anything like that are not particularly interested in the history of the Caribbean don't realize how important the movements of persons of African descent brought about in the Caribbean, right? For example, the Haitian Revolution is a sore point there, right? As well as the Christmas Rebellion, right? The Bussa revolts, right? What happened on the I don't remember how to pronounce the word properly. The Maglenenberg plantation, right? The rise of Nanny Grig, the rise of different revolts, especially in Berbice and Essequibo, the impacts that had for the Dutch, right? The impacts that the revolts, the Bossa revolt, as well as the Grenada uprising had for the British, the impact that the Haitian Revolution had for the French, and not just the French, but for the entire world. These systems of revolt and resistance are one of the key factors and the advantage of the historical definition in defining the Caribbean. Because while slavery and these other things existed elsewhere, or movements towards not even independence yet, but emancipation is important. All right. The Haitian Revolution is a part of the reason why the French Revolution was so iconic in a sense, right? The Haitian Revolution led to the toppling of regimes, proving that slavery can be defeated, a slave system can be defeated, that a plantocracy can lose. Right? The Haitian Revolution marked a period in history which set ablaze throughout the rest of the entirety of the Caribbean, right? Bringing emancipation in years coming. Right? So the major revolts and rebellions towards emancipation ties us together as a region. We also had the movement towards independence, as Shanique has said, right? Our movement towards independence is important. The creation of bipartisanship within the Caribbean, two-party system, right? Almost all of our Caribbean countries that we live in, right, have two parties, two major parties rather, right? Because there are other political parties, but two major parties, right? They rise towards emancipation through the creation of workers' unions, because it's through workers' unions the creation of political parties come through, All right. Workers' unions crop up within the Caribbean, and then the head of that worker union gets the backing of all the workers, and then that becomes a political party. All right. So we're looking at the rise of bipartisanship within the Caribbean and our movements towards independence by lobbying throughout the Caribbean. We're also at the 1940s troubles, but we're going to speak about the 1940s troubles and why the British had to send in warships in order to intimidate and control the Caribbean people as they were fighting against oppressive regimes within the 1940s, right, within the period of the Second World War and throughout. The rise of Garveyism, right? The rise of negritude, right? These different things influence the Caribbean as a whole and holds us together as a region historically, right? So when we look at historical definitions, it's not just listing out these four things and said them something here. No, it's not about that, right? But that's why I do require you guys to do more extensive reading in order to fortify these essays, right, into essays that are a force to be reckoned with. Right, so the historical definition is somewhat like that. Is there anything to add? Any questions, concerns, emotional outbursts, any issues? That's generally the historical definition, right? Caribbean says is about discussion. It's about analysis, right? So I can't give points and equations on how to get this information, but all I can do is discuss with you, all right? And I hope that you guys participate in the discussions as well. All right, but are there any questions or concerns? If there are no questions or concerns, just drop a one in the chat if we're ready and prepared to move towards the political definition of the Caribbean. All right. So in order for the Europeans, let me just read this last bulletin here. In order for the Europeans to gain control of the new land, quote unquote new land, European policies and politics had to be superimposed upon the people of the Caribbean and also the people that they brought to the Caribbean. Right? So the historical definition is an umbrella of the political and diasporic definitions. So it is from the historical definition that the political and diasporic definitions evolve and emerge. Right? So let's have a look at that, the political definition.